All right, here
Alright.
we are. We're live on YouTube. Welcome, everyone. This is Coffee with Aliens at the Movies. Today we're discussing the early films of Pier Paolo Pasolini, who was a poet who turned filmmaker. And we're also going to be touching on some other filmmakers of that era from the Neorealism period. My name is Robert Bellissimo. I'm an actor and acting teacher.
I'm Steve Chambers. I'm a writer and actor.
I'm Simon Furness, and I'm an actor and teacher.
And yes, today we have a special guest, Simon Furness from London, England, who's a former teacher of mine, as well as a director of a short film we did together called Tiramisu.
Oh, yes.
And if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to our channel. We do film reviews as well as film education on various world cinema and perhaps movies that you may not have heard of, or if you're interested in acting or filmmaking or screenwriting or film history in general. So let's just jump right into it. So it's interesting, Simon, that you as we spoke, Acatone and Mama Rosa came to mind. So what is it about those two films that are worth discussing for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, Acatone and Mama Roma were the first two. Yeah, Mama Roma, I think. Yeah, were the first two.
Mama Roma.
Feature films by Pasolini, and you know, he's a very, very significant figure in Italian culture, you know, and politics and poetry. Probably one of the most significant figures in post-war Italian cultural life, I would say. You know, and he was an extraordinary combination of talents. He was a poet, he was a commentator, he was a filmmaker, extraordinary contradiction too, because, you know, he was raised as a Catholic, he was gay, he was also a Marxist, he was the son of a fascist infantry officer, and you know, I think his films, Acatone and Mama Roma, they're quite different, I think, in style and texture to the other earlier films of a neorealist period. You mentioned Bicycle Thieves, or we were talking about that. It's there's something rougher. There's something rougher about Pasolini's work. I don't know. I mean, we live in an age now where everything's quite sort of not homogenized, but we're used to clean lines and to lack of mess. Whereas with Pasolini, you get this kind of very visceral feeling of life on the Roman streets. And it isn't the Rome of the tourists, I have to say. Acatone means thief. You know,
I hadn't seen either of those films until I was preparing for our talk now, and I found Acatone, but a bad copy. The good version didn't have subtitles, so
anyway,
yeah, I had the same when I watched it again. The same experience.
Yeah, so it didn't look, but anyway, I get it. But yeah, what you were just saying, Simon. I mean, certainly, it's nothing like what you know. The version of Rome that we get in, you know, an American movie, of course, is hotels and all the that sort of thing. But even with, as you just said, like the other neorealist films, they are grittier. They are, and I was reading a lot about Pasolini, and it's fascinating. And it's sort of like how he and, like, we'll say De Sica, even though like years apart, would take non-actors for their films, but for really different reasons. And whereas like the Sica and the Bicycle Thief, because I want it to blend in documentary, like real feeling. Whereas Pasolini, I was reading about Mama Roma anyway, wanted to like call attention that this isn't an actor. But so to my ignorant eyes, I wouldn't like the in Mama Roma, the son was not an actor, and I don't think he acted again, unless I'm incorrect. But he was great.
Yeah, he was. Ettore Garofalo, interesting actor.
And I was pleasantly surprised because I don't know about you, but I've still got a teenage thing where if I'm doing something for research, I'm like, oh, you know, I'm not going into it like, here we go. However, with both these films, especially Acatone, I watched just this morning, in fact. And it started, and I'm like, okay. And for some reason, I'm like, oh, what does it say about me? I think this is cool. Like, I'm so into this. But not but sort of in the way like people years and years ago thought like they missed the point. Like they thought Stanley Kowalski or Paul Newman and HUD were cool, but they were rapists. But we missed that. And watching like Akatone, like he's a pimp, really. But so I shouldn't say he's cool. I don't know, but he was very command. Now that was an actor. Who played him? He was great. But anyway,
Sergio Citti. Yes, Pasolini used a lot of the same actors. Not Sergio, Franco Citti was the actor who played Akatone, and his brother Sergio was a producer, I think, and certainly the Citti boys, they were kind of in the Pasolini circle. Pasolini had his little circle, you know, Laura Betti, Citti, the Cittis, Ninetto Davoli, with whom he had quite a love affair. Starting when Davoli was 15.
That's right.
I should say that Pasolini was avowedly and openly gay, and this led to a lot of trouble for him. I mean, he was expelled from the Italian Communist Party for alleged offences against minors. Now, whatever the evidence of that all is, he was a guy, despite his intellectual appearance, he liked the rough trade, he liked the streets, and that was where he kind of hung out. And Akatone, you really have that feeling, especially with the Roman dialect. And it's slightly with that wonderful music by Bach, which slightly offsets it, counterpoints it. But you get this very rough-hewn street life, and then you get this very measured classical music by Bach, and it gives the watcher quite a jolt, I think, watching it. And then, did you find that the music?
Such a juxtaposition. I actually super liked it. In fact, it didn't even like it worked in a way. It wasn't until way deep into the film where I'm like, whoa, this is such an odd choice of music for visual. But it took me a while to think about that because it just felt correct. And just really quickly, you had just mentioned that Pasolini was really good with the real like Roman dialect. And so didn't even, and Robert, you might know that too, Fellini, right? Didn't he bring Pasolini on to write, I forget, maybe it was La Dolce Vita?
Nights of Cabiria.
Nights of Cabiria.
Nights of Cabiria, which is about a prostitute. It's about a prostitute, you see?
I've seen that one. And so that it's interesting that he would have brought, that makes sense too, right? Pasolini was a writer first. But anyway.
Yes, he was.
Yeah,
terrific. I mean, that's because Mama Roma, she played by the great Anna Magnani. We shouldn't forget she was one of the great actresses, I think, of the 20th century. And you see her in Roma Città Aperta, that famous run towards her son who's been carried away. I think it's her son, is it? Yeah, she gets shot in the back. That famous scene. And she was an extraordinary actor, what they call a force of nature, I think. You know.
Yeah, she was incredible.
Extraordinary in Mama Roma.
There's a moment right at the end of Mama Roma where it's just, I don't know if they just cut it, just found this moment and used it, or if it was a deliberate, action, and I want this reaction of you in shock about your son being jailed. And I don't know if you guys know the shot I'm talking about, but it's like she looks like she's seen a ghost, and I thought, how do you even
that final shot? Yeah.
And I'm like, how do you, like, you know, where do you go to even find that would be very difficult. So it's amazing that she could do something that real and that shock reaction, because those are the hardest things to do, as we all know. We need you to be shocked in this, you know. I thought, incredible. I didn't realize. I didn't realize that apparently before Rome opened City, she mainly had done comedies and light comedies, that was a deliberate.
I was surprised.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. It was a deliberate move to put her in this neorealism world. I'm not sure as to why Rossellini felt that was the way to go, but I think they also just wanted to have someone who was a star to help with selling it, perhaps. But she's phenomenal. Well,
by the time she made Mama Roma, she was quite a well-known actress. I mean, I think she did win an Oscar for a role in The Rose Tattoo, a film of the Tennessee Williams play. She won an Oscar for that, and she was she made a number of movies, but she's a very memorable presence, but she feels very ordinary in a way. You know, I suppose the modern equivalent might be in our country, the Ken Loach films. If you think about the women in his films, You know, they've got a kind of earthiness about them, and there's a sort of lack of pretense. And you do feel like you're listening to a Roman housewife talking. You know, I'm not familiar, I don't know the Roman world very well, but you do feel that she's talking with the accent and the authentic smell, I suppose, of the place
well
where she's
said.
from.
Yeah,
you know?
I think so.
Yeah, she seems like she comes right. I don't know her background, but she seems like she comes right from those streets.
Yeah, yeah. Well, she was a very she was a trained actress. She went to a drama school in Rome, and but I didn't know about the comedy thing that she had at the beginning. But she's known for this kind of realist drama, isn't she?
That's
I think her last appearance in film was with a film by Fellini called Roma. She makes a very brief appearance in that, and that's the very last film she made. But she's on the screen for only a few seconds. But yeah, a remarkable actress. And I suppose it's also, you know, in the Mama Roma, you know, she kind of, that world of prostitutes and pimps and thieves that we've talked about, he seems to be doing something different there with that world than he was doing in Acatoni. Mama Roma's got a kind of, I wouldn't say poetic, but you know those scenes where she's walking down the street and these guys come out from the darkness and walk along with her?
Yes.
It's a long tracking shot. You know, you're kind of following her on a journey, and you go through this journey with her, like a bit like Into the Underworld. You know, it's like she's like a female Odysseus or something. She's kind of mythically trudging along through her life. You know, like I think of Brecht's Mother Courage, that woman who never gives up, who's indomitable. You know, who's very fixed and firm in her views and her opinions. You know. And she can't. She's not somebody who gets defeated by life, you know.
No, there's definitely a striving to. One thing I found that was in common with the two films is, which I love, is that there's a striving to do better with both Acatone and Mama Roma, in the sense that we don't like what we're doing. We don't like that we're pimps and prostitutes, but the alternative is to be a day laborer and backbreaking work, or in Mama Roma's case, to be selling, being a food vendor in the streets. And it's that the two options for them are both unbearable. And I thought that it's interesting because there's this attitude, particularly in Acatone, about work being like crap, and it's not out of laziness. It's just because the options are crap in the sense that again, you're just doing back-breaking work. But what I love is that no one knows what to do, and this is something Steve and I have touched on in when we've been exploring these Italian films lately. Is people want something, but they don't know how to go about it. And this is something that is a real lack from Hollywood films, in the sense that characters always seem to know what they're doing. And this is, again, what Cassavetes' criticism of Hollywood films was as well.
Yes.
Like, people aren't like that in life. And I thought that was captured they beautifully.
Like Hollywood, everything, it's what you said, it's clean, right? Everything is just, how do we get... Like, I saw this really neat video where someone took, I think it's De Sica's, I think it's called Terminal Station with Montgomery.
Oh yeah, Roma Stazione Termine. Yeah.
With Cliff,
And then there's like the American version. And someone on YouTube is really neat, took them side by side and showed why they're different. David O. Selznick doing the Hollywood one. And it says it all. He cuts anything that isn't necessary. So there's like Montgomery Clift and I think it's Jennifer Jones walk into the cafeteria in the station. And then in the Hollywood one, they walk in, cut, they walk out. And then in the Sica one, you watch them and you focus on what to the American version become extras, but in the original Italian version is the non-stars of the film are still focused on, like the everyday people are still a focus. And I think I'm like, well, doesn't that, watching those two side by side, say it all? And back to Robert's point too, it's just everything's clean. Everyone, and not just visually, everyone knows what they want. You get it, and that's the joke. Especially in, I won't say actors, but Hollywood, like American films, is the only time you'll see someone want to cry. Like in life, you hold that back, you know. But in an American film, it's, you know, cry and everything's on the surface. But certainly with like the two Pasolini films we're talking about, no, there's nothing obviously on the surface, which makes it more like life and makes it, I guess some people would call it more of a challenge to watch. I actually found it really like visually seductive. I found it like straightforward and not in a bad way. And my favorite thing is still what you were talking about there in Mama Roma, is that long tracking shot of her at night where only she's lit and the guys kind of come out, and to me it felt like really surreal, and as though she was just on this Eli monologue, sort of like, this is who I am and I'm tough, and then like her past, like the kind of Johns were coming out like an evil Greek chorus, and she's like, no, and just she kept going, and that was so cool.
Well, you made a good point there about the classical world, because Pasolini, I think, felt, I get the impression that he felt that Italy, post-war Italy, was beginning to sell its soul to the whole consumerist culture, which, as we now know, is completely dominates us globally. But Pasolini was very in touch with a kind of what he felt was a classical, mythical, antique past. He made films of Oedipus Rex, Edipo Rey, for example, and the Medea, and he filmed those in North Africa, I think. And you know, I think he felt that the last vestiges of that culture were alive in the Roman working class, and that therefore, you know, the kind of storytelling technique you're referring to and who his heroes or anti-heroes are people who are not necessarily, well, they certainly aren't educated or literate or have been to university. See, Pasolini would, I think, the whole Hollywood thing, that's all the bourgeois capitalist construct, and that we are fed with this day in, day out. But you go to a film by Pasolini and you're walking into a completely different universe. And he was an avowed communist, but of course he was also gay and he was Catholic, so there was a number of contradictions, which tragically, you know, contributed to a very horrific end. You know, he died in very painful and rather mysterious circumstances,
wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he picked up a rent boy outside Ostia in Rome one night in 1975, took him out to Ostia, which is a beach area. And I don't know, I haven't been there lately, but that was where he took his fellas, and it went wrong. Right. And what happened was that other guys turned up, and they beat him up, robbed him, and then drove over his body in his car.
Yeah.
And no one to this day, it's a classic delitto italiano, no one really knows who the other guys were.
Who did it?
On the left, they say it was a fascist thing. On the right, they say it was the left who did it. He made many enemies, Pasolini. You have to say this. You know, in '68, when the great student demonstrations were happening, paradoxically, he didn't take the side of the students. He felt that the students were all what he called figli di papà, daddy's sons. They were all middle-class bourgeois people who were kind of getting on the coattails of the revolution. The real proletarians were the policemen. So he actually backed the police because he felt they were the real working class. So he was not a man to go with the current tide. He was not orthodox, I think, you know, at all. So Willem Dafoe made a movie, an Abel Ferrara film called Pasolini. Did you see it?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that.
Oh, I just found out about
it. It's a biopic. Quite
interesting. I saw it. I saw it not too long ago, and what you described is exactly what they depict. He's with a young man, and they portray the men who attack him as being homophobic and beating him up purely because he was gay, and then the other guy gets in on it. So you feel like, is this some kind of setup, or was it something that just happened? Wrong place, wrong time. No one really knows, but it's an okay film. It's on Kanopy. I don't know if you get Kanopy in the UK, Simon.
No, I got this on Netflix. I haven't heard of Kanopy. No, is it good?
Oh, okay. Yeah, Kanopy, I think it's just a North American streaming service that's free through the libraries of America, and it's great, and they have stuff from all over the world. But it is on there if anyone watching wanted to check it out. I was actually curious that, because you touched on this, Simon, and yes, you know, this is clearly from the neorealist style of filmmaking, Acatone and Mama Roma. But what do you think is different as opposed to De Sica or Rossellini? Is it simply that he went further with it, or he looked at more people who are even in worse situations as the people in Bicycle Thieves, or what do you think?
Well, it's hard to put it into words exactly, but I feel, I wouldn't say there's a tendency to sentimentalize in these early films by Rossellini and Fellini. But Pasolini, I don't know. I just feel it's a filmmaking style and a refusal to carry a message or to really reflect almost anything redeeming in his characters sometimes. I mean, you think about Acatone, God, there's a horrendous scene where he steals a necklace off his son without his son knowing it. You know, and I think Pasolini is remarkable in that he refuses to sentimentalize his characters in any degree whatsoever. You know, and he's got this curious ability to call out what I would call the sacred from the ordinary. And you know, he's very, by looking at something in its environment and not sentimentalizing it and not commenting on it or judging it, he succeeds in bringing out something extraordinary within it. That, I think, and also his love of classical art. If you know in Mama Roma, the first scene, do you remember the wedding scene?
Yes,
it's all laid out like the Last Supper. That's almost a copy of the Last Supper by Leonardo. And later, in the end of the movie, where the boy is dying in the hospital, that's a copy of, like a film, that painting by Mantegna. I think, you know, where Christ is been laid down on the off the crucifix. I forget the name. It's by Mantegna anyway. I think it's called The Crucifixion, something like that. But Pasolini was clearly in that film anyway, really almost not carbon copying, but he was referencing classical art in a way that perhaps Fellini wasn't or De Sica wasn't. You know, they had their own ends, of course, but that's what I noticed as being significantly different about him anyway. In these early films.
Yes, and also at the same time, there is a real feeling of empathy for these people, and I mean, I don't feel that I hate Acatone or that he's some kind of villain, or it's just that he's, as I said earlier, he's this guy trying to do better, but he doesn't quite know how, or doesn't quite know how to go about it the wrong way. And it's really interesting how he falls in love with that woman, that beautiful blonde woman, purely because she was so innocent, she was hardworking, and he has that opportunity to follow up with that other woman, and where he was making all his money as prostituting her, and he could have done that, and he doesn't. And I thought that's really interesting.
Can't do it. Yeah. Well, this is part of Pasolini's ethic. He says there's a system of in the consumerist capitalist culture, someone like Acatone can never escape because he's a product of a society, of a social system, or an economic system that demands the existence of an underclass. And so he is trapped by an economic system as much as by his own personal, obstacles. You see, the bourgeois cinema, if you like, emphasizes the personal. Oh, it's because I get drunk, or it's because I do this. Pasolini says, no, it's none of those things. It's because you are the victim of a system of exploitation and oppression. This is why you are trapped where you are. And I think he's you feel that quite powerfully in his films. And he goes on to, I mean, as his later films come on, I haven't watched it again yet, but there's this film here, Theorem, with Terence Stamp, Teorema, which he made in '68. And that's a very different kind of film. And he kind of, after Mama Roma, I think he drifted away from the neorealist techniques and styles, and he began to move into more, I wouldn't say abstract, but certainly more, he was more conscious of not formulaic, but he was trying to convey a message in whatever form he could. And that meant really going against the realistic tradition. I mean, the point of Salon, one of his last films, I had never been able to sit through Salon. It's too much for me to sit through, I have to say, Salon. But, you know, Theorem, for example, it's quite set up. This man, played by Terence Stamp, plays the part of a divine stranger. who doesn't have a name, and he comes into a Milanese bourgeois family, and he sleeps with the maid, he sleeps with the son, he sleeps with the husband, he sleeps with the wife, and they all of them fall into varying states of disarray. You know, the bourgeois parents cut off this experience, sexual encounter with the divine nature. They fall into a state of almost catatonia. Their system of oppression and the world in which they've grown up in doesn't permit them to respond to a divine experience like that. And he shows that the bourgeois world prevents you from experiencing life. You know, so he gets, I think, increasingly drawn to portraying that message in a very it's not everyone's taste, you know, but if you want a kind of ABCD narrative storytale style, this is not that kind of film. But then he was never interested in kind of, you know, making a film to appeal to that kind of audience, you know. So
that's one I have to revisit. I saw it many years ago with Terrence Stamp. And it's definitely one that I have to see again. But yeah, you're right. Like it's right after Roma, he moved very far from neorealists, definitely. And it's interesting because so many of the neorealists stayed within that genre for you know at least 10 years or more. And he moved right from it, even though he took it so much further and really did something quite unique with it. And even Bertolucci thought that, because Bertolucci is I don't know if you two know, I'm sure you know that he worked on Acatone, and he was like, I was witnessing a new cinema, like a new way of making films, and which is so true, because and you can see the influence on, you know, Steve and I have mentioned it's just purely it's not coincidental, I don't think, that how much he influenced Scorsese and Coppola. You know, from the use of music to the roughness, from the characters being someone you perhaps wouldn't like, but you can still empathize with them. And I know Scorsese has always highlighted the brilliant scene where is he once he needs money, he starts to sell stuff, and that one guy says, you know, you're gonna sell this, you're gonna sell that, and then eventually you're not gonna have your eye to weep with. You know, and I love that line, and I thought, wow, what a great, you know, what a guy. Of course, he was a poet, right? So what a poetic way to put it. But it's I don't know if the two of you when I'd seen the book, I watched them again this past week. Both of them scared me. I don't know. That's the one thing that I found, as opposed to the neorealists are, you know, scary in the sense that you don't want to be in that world. But I think because they're sentimentalized a little more, as you said, Simon. It's more that it moves you emotionally, and Sica is brilliant at that, particularly at the end with the little boy pleading for them to not arrest the father. Or stealing the bike. But with Mama Rosa, I just, you know, when he's having Acatone, when he's having that nightmare before he has to go back to do more back-breaking work, his funeral, I just got goosebumps. You know, it scared the hell out of me. And I don't know if either of you.
I think it's like with Acatone specifically, and again back to like the kind of not Hollywood thing. And Robert and I talked about this briefly, but whether we know it consciously or not, films are predictable. Like your body kind of knows what scene's coming next, what type of scene. Like if something really tragic happened in a Hollywood movie, then something good has to happen. Like you start to get that. There's this innate, it's just unpredictable for me, Acatone. Like it's unpredictable. And not to say like it's just a wild movie of not at all. There's a clear structure. There's a clear story. Everything's clear. But what scared, because I'm definitely uneasy, not scared like horror movie style, but the uneasiness is I have no idea where this could go. Anything can happen next. And that's what keeps me, it made me, like the film went by fast, my eyes were like wide open the whole time. Like I was like, oh shit. Because there's just, there's no conventional feeling to it. And I'd say, while there's no conventional feeling in say 8.5, I mean that's kind of, but the world itself feels safe to me in 8.5. Like the world's kind of like it's surreal in a dream, in a happy dream kind of a way, where Akatone is just dark. It reminded me, sounds nuts, I understand, but it reminded me somehow of the opening sequence of The Exorcist, like the whole thing in the desert. Like it just had this like it's that setup, like something, but that's the, and then he just like sustained it to me in Akatone. It just sustained this like, oh shit, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Like I know what's going on. Sorry, I shouldn't say what's going on, but like I just don't know what the character's next choice is going to be. Where I think I usually would. In even a Fellini film, you kind of start to get like, I know
you can't get ahead of it.
I know where you're going. I know, okay, and it's great. But here, I go, I don't know. I didn't see him dying right at the end like that either.
No,
like, that's it.
His last words as he's lying there on the veranda, on the curb there, having evaded police capture on a moped. His last words are "molto bene," and you go. Very good. Your life has led you to this, and a system of exploitation, oppression has led you to this. So there's no dying speech. There's no message. There's no kind of guys, you know, remember before I die this, you know, none of that.
Exactly. That's what I like, though. Like I don't see that coming in any movie.
Yeah, there, and yes, it's correct. It's like the only way he. Yeah, absolutely, and it's that what's so tragic about it is that he finds peace and probably what he wants through dying, and that's really his only way out. Otherwise, he's gonna continue to either pimp or do
that's it
work or run from the police for the rest of his life. So it's just wow. I mean, it's that's what really scared me, because I think, you know, this could be me, and this is happening now, you know, with, you know, in many parts of the world, people are experiencing these type of conditions. So that's what the main thing I took from it, as opposed to the early films, was it just is really scary, but extremely effective. I was going to, I don't, one point that I didn't realize last night. I don't know if either of you knew this, but apparently towards the late 40s, there was a conservative government brought back into Italy, and they were against these neorealist films, because they thought you have to uplift people, and you see very
the Telefone Bianche, the white telephone.
The white telephone films, yes.
Fluffy and
everybody be happy, and whereas it's a kind of consumerist attempt to lift people's spirits after the war.
100%. Yeah, it's fascinating, and so no wonder Pasolini didn't even like get in trouble. I don't know, got in trouble. Yeah, he did. He totally did.
He did, because you mentioned the earlier films. I was watching last night a good little film on YouTube. You can get it. It's only 35 minutes long. It's called La Ricotta, which is basically the story of the Passion of Christ. Now, he made this as part of a portmanteau film with Rossellini, Jean-Luc Godard, and anyway, there was a whole 4 of them, I think. One other as well, I forget. But anyway, Pasolini's contribution was a 35-minute film called La Ricotta, about a film crew shooting the crucifixion. And you know, it's got all these extraordinary characters kind of carrying on, and the AD going, okay, put the music on, as they're on the cross, and they put the wrong music on. It's rock and roll music. No, not that music, the other music. And then one of the guys playing the thieves, he goes off the catering van, and he nicks the food, and he scurries off for it and tries to hide it so he can eat it later, and his dog eats the food from the catering van. And there are all kinds of crazy things going on. And then Laura Betti, who's playing a nun, does a striptease in long shot. And, you know, all kinds of... And Orson Welles is in it. He's playing the director. Sort of a Pasolini kind of alter ego figure. And it's an extraordinary film, because it's very light and it's very comical. And these are not qualities one associates with Pasolini necessarily. You know, And I think there were Uccellini, which he made with Totò, the great Italian clown, also has a similar lightness of spirit and touch about it. That's more allegorical in flavor, perhaps. But La Ricotta certainly has these moments of divine, well, I say divine comedy. But I use the word divine a lot because I think the divine is very important in Pasolini's work. He is religious, he's spiritual, but he's not religious. I mean, he's Catholic, right, but he doesn't subscribe to the power structures of the Catholic Church. He says the spiritual is in the ordinary. And I suspect that if Christ came to earth again, in Pasolini's eyes, he would be a Roman working class guy from the slums, a bit like Acatone. Right. Now, that's quite a blasphemous thing for the Catholic Church at the time to contemplate. In fact, I think he went to prison for 4 months when La Ricotta was released, because they found, the church found it blasphemous. So he was always in trouble, you know.
He was always in trouble. So it's interesting to me. So his first film, he's about 40. So so I don't know too much about his past. I know he was a writer. So why like, and successful, however you might define that, but so what do you think, what is it that pulled him, like, you have to make a movie? Do you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't 20 and I'll make a movie. Like, you're an established you know, intellectual, and then you go into this new medium at 40. And I'm just curious, like, what I imagine, knowing what I do about him, that it must have felt necessary to do so, not like a business move. So what pulled him that way?
Well, it's a very good question, you know, Steve. I mean, you alluded earlier to the fact that he spent a long apprenticeship working for the likes of Bertolucci and Fellini. So he had considerable writing credits and writing experience, but he was called on, as you say, to give some flavor of realism, some Roman realism to these early films. And you rightly say he was a poet too. He was also a painter, actually. In fact, in this little book here called Roman Poems, can you see, there he is. And now he's walking through the slums there of Rome. Can you see how the picture's not great, but you see how muddy the streets are? And you know, these boys are quite young, but he did drawings. Painting. If I can find one here, look, there's a painter, a drawing called Tears. Yeah,
and he did this.
You can't see it very well, but you know, and then there's another one there as well. You know, so he was a designer and a graphic of some considerable interest for it. You know, he pursued that world. So I suppose his interest in painting and drawing led him naturally into the modern film. Led his interest there. I'm only supposing that. But I was thinking today, Steve, I don't know if you've got, Robert, reflected on this, but so many of the great post-war cinematographers are Italian. You know, you think about Storaro, who shot The Apocalypse Now, and also The Godfather. You think about Tonino Delli, who shot all of Sergio Leone's films and Pasolini's films. And I think the early I always think the early DOPs were in fact the great Renaissance painters. Leonardo, Mantegna, all those people, they were kind of directors of photography. So it's interesting, you get this tradition being continued in post-war cinema. And of course, these guys went to Hollywood. Hollywood bought them, you know, because they were the best in their field.
They were the best.
So it's a long answer to the question, but I think Pasolini was a polymath. He was a very multi-talented guy, and film was just another extension, a way of expressing his message, conveying it, I suppose. You know?
Okay, that's really well said. Actually, that really explains that. And it makes sense again to what
I'm sorry, guys. I just
you dropped out, Rob. You okay?
Yeah, I just there we go. I just didn't realize my battery was so low, so I just had to I just had to get my
you're back. Good.
Computer to plug it in, but yeah, it's okay now.
No, but that was
I didn't realize that Storaro shot Apocalypse Now. I heard you mention that, and I didn't know that he had done so many American films, and of course Last Tango in Paris is the other one. But they really knew how it's. I mean, I'm no expert on cinematography, but they really. I had watched an interview with Storaro, and he had said that speaking just on about 8.5, and Steve and I touched on this yesterday in our discussion about that, how when they began to shoot films with dialogue after the silent period, they were using so much light all the time, and the inventiveness of using shadows or lack of light in order to elicit either an emotion or a feeling or whatever it may be was really becoming lost, with the exception of maybe film noir. That again coming from the German filmmaking, but 8.5 is when they started to see, oh, what we can really do a lot here with light. And Storaro said that was a real example of experimenting with lighting and shadows. And of course, you can see that in Apocalypse Now with the Marlon Brando scene. He's totally in shadow. With Martin Sheen, and it is like paintings. It's quite something what those guys achieved. I don't know anyone now who's like that in that regard.
No, I think the industry has changed. The whole post or role of the lighting cameraman doesn't really exist anymore in quite the same way. I mean, people like Storaro, Delicolli, they understood how light worked. And they understood that in conjunction with camera work. Again, I'm an actor and teacher. I'm not a cinematographer by any means, but you know, those guys were extraordinary magicians with light and shade, as you say, and they learn how to. But I was making a general point that, you know, the earliest DOPs were the guys in the Renaissance who were looking at. I mean, I should think all those paintings, those crucifixions and the Madonna and so on, the way that they were arranged in those group tableaus. You know, they showed an extraordinary understanding of, like Caravaggio, for example, the way figures seem to kind of lurch out of the light at you in quite a menacing way sometimes. And that's the modern cinematography comes to life in films now. But in those days, that's what they did, you know? Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's quite.
That's really good.
It's quite inventive and remarkable, and I think so often is something that. Perhaps because I'm more, as you say, you know, we're actors and acting teachers, and we're a little more interested in the school of perhaps Cassavetes or Mike Leigh, where it was so much more about the people and much less any kind of visual style. Even though Cassavetes is someone who started to experiment with that in some of his middle to later film. It is quite a work of art in the sense of how you can make that useful and not make it so empathetic in the sense of feel this, feel that. Here's the cue music. It's not really grabbing you by the throat in that way, but it's subtle. Yet you can tell it's there, but it just. I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but it's not in the sense of Hitchcock where everything is to tell you what to feel. It's more that it's just working within the relationships and what the characters are experiencing. I don't know if you felt that it was that as well.
What you mean in terms of you're there's a certain kind of cinema, isn't there, where you are kind of being made to feel things, and that's the most important thing. And that works very well. I mean, in a character like Pasolini, for example, perhaps are less interested in making you feel things as opposed to showing you what a certain kind of economic structure or a political structure does to people, you know, and he gets increasingly interested in that. And that's not to negate any of his very painterly qualities as a filmmaker, but you never forget that he's a Marxist. You never forget that. I mean, I suppose Ken Loach's films carry a certain message. There's no doubt about it. You know where he's coming from politically, don't you? You know, he's on the side of the underdog. And you know, but he's saying, well, look, I don't identify with it emotionally, but so much as look at the system which is producing that. That's the thing to change, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas the other concept, the Hollywood storytelling model, isn't interested in altering the social structure. Yeah.
That's a different. That fascinates me, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like one being the feel this now, and the other being you're kind of the co-writer. You feel hey, I'm giving you this.
Directly involved.
How you feel is up to you. That's interesting.
And I suppose in a way what I'm trying to get at with when we're talking about the cinematography, not so much from the early Pasolini or the neorealist sense of the word, where we just take our cameras and go out in the street. But I think in the 60s, again, with starting with 8.5 and what Storaro was doing with Bertolucci is this somehow doesn't give you the same I'm going to tell you how to feel, but yet is visually striking at the same time. How they did that, I have no idea. That's the mystery of the way these guys work, where I don't get the sense that they're pulling you here, pulling you there, pulling you there. It's almost secondary to what's going on, yet stands out in such a way. The other thing I was going to mention, which was something that they, again, just on a visual or editing sense of the word, with this documentary feel, speaking in terms of Bicycle Thieves, was that they also wanted to have very little cutting. They wanted you to just, like a documentary, stay on these people and go with it. And it's just, this is what it is. We're not giving you a message. This is what it is. This is what's happening. And this is what we're all experiencing right now. So and that is true. There's long takes. There's very little cuts. And now in a world where we have more and more cuts, jump cuts, and all the time as ways to keep your attention going here, it just stays on these people. And of course Cassavetes was highly influenced by De Sica in that way as well. This sort of the camera crew working like a documentary film crew and reacting off of the actors, as opposed to, as the three of us all know, we're working for the camera crew and a lot of the time making their job easier, where it really should be the other way around. Because we're the ones in front of the camera.
Good point. That's really
but in the commercial model in which we work, the commercial model in which we work seems to only allow the standard, long shot, mid shot, close up, 2-shot onto the next setup, and it's a factory, and you can see that it's a wonder that anyone can produce any work of real quality within that factory structure. And yet there are people who do.
Exactly.
There are people who do, directors, actors who do produce work of quality in that structure, but it's an economic structure. It's dictated by the conditions. 100%. And gentlemen, let's be honest about this. Money is the god now, right?
Oh, of course.
So
exactly.
In a world where, I know you both are fans of the American 70s filmmaking scene. Well, I get the impression that money wasn't the only criterion there. So you got the storytellers were able to tell the story they wanted to tell. Whereas now you've got executives and producers leaning over.
Like the studios are run by banks. The money comes. The idea to finance a film has nothing to do with the filmmaker's idea or art. These decisions are made by people that have never made a movie, which is insane. And the thing with the 70s, 100%, is like people gave a shit for a second. And then I still think, and I don't think I invented this thought, I've seen it, but, by accident, people who really cared, George Lucas doing Star Wars, I think this was an important boyhood kind of thing. And oops, that changed everything, because the powers that be went, oh, wait a second.
Yeah,
we can make that kind of money, and we can make toys that go with it, and that was the beginning of the end. And I don't think that was by design. And it kind of is like the snake who ate its own tail thing. And it hasn't changed. It's just gotten crazier and crazier. And to Robert's point, I think that's really interesting, that I do feel, whether I'm working on a TV show, a movie, commercial, especially, your job, you just serve the technical. That's your job. Where I remember I had actually Robert's current agent, Craig, had once said to me, and I like these, like, don't forget though, you're what we see up there. Like, it is still, like, no one's watching a film to watch the performance of the camera crew. And not to take anything away from that, of course. But it is often in this commercial system, especially if you're unknown, oh God, like you just hit your mark and shut up. Like, and that's, you can't do anything. And it's very formulaic. And like you said, Simon, and there is, you go long, wide, medium, close. Next. Well, wait, can I do it again?
No.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah, we'll fix it in post. Yeah.
Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah. But again, to return to my point earlier, Pasolini, for example, worked outside that system. He did not confer, and because Italy wasn't really, with its homegrown film industry, it wasn't dependent on American money or input. I mean, I think the early neorealists were shooting. They borrowed film from American military laboratories because they hadn't got their own film stock. Right. But other than that, what they were making was not anything like the films that were being made in Hollywood at that period. No, they were at the beginning of making a genuinely Italian filmmaking thing, and they've been doing that, I think, since the 30s. We tend to think of neorealism as being born out of the ashes of the Second World War. I'm not so sure. I don't know enough about Italian pre-war cinema, but I get the impression that the roots of neorealism are already there in a kind of national feeling of what cinema could be. It's very different to the American model of that time,
right.
But
and it's also a lot of these guys were working with Renoir in France in the 30s, and he was working in that mode as well. So it wasn't totally born out of Italy, even though we think it is. But it really was in France in the 30s, and I'm sure it's no surprise that this neorealism movement was most successful in not only Italy but in France and in America. And of course, how many people to this day we take this. This is why I love having these discussions, because a lot of the time people don't know the roots of now picking up your iPhone and going out and making a movie comes from this. We're not going to wait for permission or a budget to go out and tell this story. We're just going to go out in the streets and do it, and forget the studio, because we want it to smell and taste like these people and like these lives. And of course, that influenced, who did it not influence? Mike Lee, Cassavetes, Ken Loach, Elaine May, Barbara Loden. I mean, everybody to this day who's an independent filmmaker owes a debt to these men from this time. And but all the way back from the 30s. And I remember about 10 years ago, I was meeting a producer, and a friend of mine, he and I had made a number of short films where, we just went out and shot stuff on the streets or in alleyways, and, would get in trouble with police and stuff like that every now and then. And he was like, well, aren't you going to get the permits? I said, he's like, well, don't you need this? I said, no, we just went out and shot it. He looked at me like I was some kind of saying something so alien. And I thought, well, this is why it's so important to know about history, about film history, because this is not new. He's looking at me as if we're crazy. This is new. This is not new. This has been going on for 80, 90 years, but it's that, I guess it's that film school education where, oh no, you guys got to do this the proper way. And you got passion, if you got heart, and if you have something to say that's relevant that you know about, then don't wait for permission and go do it like these guys did. So that's what for me is so special about these films, and I think why I go back to them again and again. There's so much to discover. If you see it now and then see it 10 years from now, you'll probably have a different experience as I have. I think I saw Acatoni and Mama Rosa 10 years ago, and I liked them, and now I watch them, and perhaps because I've lived a little more, and maybe had some experience of lack of money or what have you, it sort of it rubs the salt on the wounds a little bit and gives me that scary feeling of, I know what that's like a little bit. So imagine what it's like if you're really falling this far down or living in this such a oppressed way. So I mean, is there anything else that either of you wanted to address, or a note you wanted to bring up? We've kind of covered a lot, haven't we? Really, I suppose with Pasolini, I just think that
I don't know about you guys, but I don't know how much of his later films you've seen. But I sort of began to lose. Yeah, I find his later films quite difficult to watch, and I like the film. I can admire the filmmaking virtuosity, but it's quite alienating to watch a film like Salah, the little I've watched.
Oh, I can't.
You know, I mean, he's basically talking about. I mean, it's an apocalyptic vision. I mean, his point being, this is the natural concomitant, the natural conclusion of a world dominated by a fascist sort of outlook, you know, and it's difficult to watch, to say the least of it. But that might just be me and my own sort of narrow-minded preconceptions. I'm prepared to accept that is the case, but you know, I think not that it concerned him. I think he was brave in that respect. He made films that he wanted to make, and he didn't make films with an eye to the marketplace, as I think, you know, we touched on before. But in terms of, I mean, his poetry, I mean, he began as a poet, you know, and, you know, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff here, but, you know, there's a poem here called Sex. I'm just at random. It's called Sex, Consolation for Poverty. And this is the translation. Sex, consolation for poverty. The whore is queen, her throne a ruin, her land a piece of shitty field. Her sceptre a purse of red patent leather. She barks in the night, dirty and ferocious as an ancient mother. That's Mama Roma, isn't it? You know?
Right, yeah.
I mean, the whore is queen, her throne a ruin. So I think Pasolini was always concerned to, through his filmmaking, to ennoble people like Mama Roma and Acatoni and say, look, these guys you walk past in the street, these guys that you might or might not flip a 50p coin to or something, they do have lives. They are the products of a system, which in my view is unfair and unjust. But if you really take the trouble to look at them, you will see something in their lives that you never saw before. But we live through the internet, folks. We don't live on the streets. And so our experience of suffering is mediated through a screen. You know, I mean, we're more used now to seeing refugees trudging their way through Europe and up to the camps at Calais. You know, Pasolini was saying it's, you know, that's in Rome, but now it's European, now it's global. So in a sense, it's spilled out of Rome. Yeah, it's spilled out of Rome, and it's a global phenomenon now because, you know, in London, I can hear all kinds of languages spoken, you know, Pashtun, Farsi, all these kind of dialects and languages, and they're the product of a very big mix that's going on now, and that's the result of systems that we have taken for granted breaking up. You know, look what's happening politically now. What's that guy in Belarus who's on his last days? Lukashenko. You know, 26 years in office, and the whole thing is crumbling. You know, we're living in these very fragmentary times now, and it's producing a lot of upheaval, population upheaval. So if Pasolini was around today, who knows what he'd be doing, but he'd probably be documenting the lives of refugees in camps, you know, and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very, very beautifully said. I'm glad you that you brought that up. Was there anything else you gentlemen, Steve or Simon, wanted to add?
I'll say I'm happy that we did this because, like I said, I didn't know much about Pasolini, and I got a chance to start watching his films and listening to Simon and you. I thought this was like a very, I'm hesitant to use the word classroom because it's got like a negative thing. But
sorry.
No. I actually super enjoyed this, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Me as well.
So it
was great. And thank you for inviting me, you guys. I appreciate it very 100%. Much. It's a good.
Thank you for
really good. Yes, really good to be a part of this.
Yeah. No, thank you for coming. I certainly, I knew a little bit about Pasolini. Of course, I admired these films as well, but I had learned a lot more than today as well about him, and your takes on him are something that I think is definitely worth hearing about for anyone interested in politics or in film or writing or poetry or you name it. Pasolini was involved in it. So thank you so much, Simon, for joining us today.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Steve.
We really appreciate it. And I just want to, before we adjourn, I just for anyone interested in seeing any of these films we discussed, Acatone and Mama Roma, they're both on YouTube for free. They're not the best quality, but you can see a really good quality version on the Criterion channel, which I know is not in the UK, but is here in Canada and in America. And they Bicycle Thieves, any of the Neorealists are on either Kanopy or the Criterion channel as well. And our friends at Unobstructed View, who sell all the Criterion collection, DVDs and Blu-rays, and many others, have Teorema, which is directed by Pasolini, which Simon brought up, and they also have Bicycle Thieves. Yeah, there we go. The Criterion, they have the Criterion one. So you can, I'll drop those links in the description box below. And I hope you enjoyed this talk today. If you haven't already done so, please hit the subscribe button in the description box below. And we will see you next time. All right, gentlemen, thanks so much.
Right. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.